All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Absolutely. Always ready to dig into something interesting.
Well, this time we're heading into the sometimes murky, sometimes dramatic world of local politics, specifically St. Johns County, Florida.
Oh, yeah, I've heard some rumblings about that. What's going on down there?
Well, we've gotten a bunch of blog posts sent in, all from this local activist, Ed Slavin. And let me tell you, he's raising some serious concerns about the county administrator, Joy Andrews.
A county administrator, that sounds pretty high up.
Oh, yeah, top dog in the county government. And from what Slavin's saying, it seems like she might be losing the trust of, well, pretty much everyone.
Oh, that's never a good sign, especially in a position like that. So what's got everyone so riled up?
Well, it all started with this whole garbage debacle.
Garbage.
Yeah, literally garbage. The county recently switched to a new garbage contractor, FCC Environmental Services.
Okay, what's so controversial about that?
Well, the transition was a complete and utter disaster. I mean, overflowing bins everywhere, missed pickups, you name it. It was chaos.
Wow. Sounds like they really dropped the ball.
And to make matters worse, this was the only garbage contractor for the entire county. So everyone was affected.
Oof. Yeah, I can see how that would cause some major headaches. So what does this have to do with the county administrator?
Well, right in the middle of this garbage crisis, what does Joy Andrews decide to do? Take a trip to China.
China. That's quite a jaunt, especially with the garbage crisis brewing back home. How long was she gone for?
16 days, according to county timesheets.
16 days. Wow, what was the reason for such a long trip?
Well, that's where things get a little, shall we say, suspicious.
Suspicious how?
Andrews claimed it was simply to pick up her kids.
Pick up her kids from China for 16 days.
Exactly. It does seem a bit excessive, doesn't it? Even with international travel and all.
Yeah, that's raising a few eyebrows for sure. I can see why people might be skeptical.
Well, Ed Slavin certainly is. He doesn't buy that explanation for a second. In fact, he flat out accuses Andrews of taking a vacation while the county was, well, drowning in garbage.
So we've got a potential trust issue brewing here. If the county administrator isn't being upfront about the reason for her trip, it definitely raises questions about her judgment and transparency.
Exactly. And this is a pretty big deal, right? We're talking about the person who's supposed to be leading the county, making critical decisions that affect everyone. If she's not being honest about something like this, what else might she be downplaying or concealing?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? And it erodes that fundamental trust that's so crucial between the government and the people it serves.
It's like that old saying, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. If she's willing to bend the truth about something like this, where does it stop?
Yeah, it sets a dangerous precedent.
And you know what? Slavin actually takes it a step further. He cites Florida Statute 837.06, which deals with false official statements.
Whoa, bringing out the legal big guns already. So what does that statute say?
Basically, it means lying to a public official in writing is a crime.
Oh, wow. So he's basically saying if Andrews lied about the China trip, she could face legal consequences.
That's exactly what he's implying. And even if it doesn't get to that point, even if no charges are filed, the mere suggestion of it is incredibly damaging.
Oh, absolutely. It casts a huge shadow over her entire administration. How can residents trust her judgment and leadership if there are questions about her honesty and integrity?
Exactly. And, it seems like this whole China trip was just the tip of the iceberg. Slavin then uncovers something even more unsettling. Potential email monitoring by county staff. Email monitoring, like spying on people's emails. That's what Slavin's alleging. He's concerned that county staff might be reading emails sent by citizens to their commissioners.
Wow, that's a serious accusation. I mean, what about people's privacy? Don't they have the right to communicate with their elected officials without fear of being monitored?
That's exactly what Slavin's arguing. He sees this as a potential violation of privacy and a threat to free speech, especially for whistleblowers who might be trying to report concerns anonymously.
Yeah, that makes sense. Whistleblowers are already taking a risk by speaking out. If they think their emails might be intercepted, it could discourage them from coming forward at all.
Right, and that could allow corruption or wrongdoing to go unchecked.
It creates a chilling effect on free speech, plain and simple.
And Slavin really drives this point home. He even quotes Henry Stimson in one of his blog posts.
Henry Stimson, the former Secretary of War, what does he have to do with all of this?
Well, Slavin quotes Stimson saying, "Gentlemen do not open each other's mail." It's a pretty powerful statement about the importance of privacy and the sanctity of communication.
Yeah, I can see why he'd use that quote. It really highlights the potential ethical violation here. Opening someone's mail, whether it's physical or digital, is a serious breach of trust.
And it's not just a hypothetical concern either. Slavin actually sends Joy Andrews a whole list of questions about this mail cover practice.
A whole list of questions, huh? What kind of things is he asking?
He wants to know what the county's policy is on monitoring citizen emails. Who's doing the monitoring? How often does it happen? He's basically demanding full transparency. He even asks for documentation, legal opinions, and statistics to back up the legality of it all.
Wow. He's not messing around. He's going full investigative journalist on this.
He's definitely not letting this one go. He smells something fishy, and he's determined to get to the bottom of it.
Well, it sounds like we've got a real leadership crisis brewing here in St. Johns County. A county administrator under fire for a questionable trip and accusations of email monitoring. Not exactly a recipe for good governance, is it?
It certainly paints a picture of an administration struggling with transparency and potentially losing the trust of its citizens. And we've only just scratched the surface of this story.
Oh, there's more.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more to unpack here. Buckle up, we're just getting started. Okay, so we're back, and things are not looking good for Joy Andrews, this county administrator.
No, not really. I mean, first you have this whole China trip thing happening right when the county's dealing with this huge garbage mess.
Right. Talk about bad timing.
Yeah, I mean, you would think a county administrator, especially one dealing with a very public crisis like this, would, I don't know, be a little more careful about how things look, like how the public would see it.
Yeah, like she was totally out of touch with what people were dealing with back home.
Exactly. It just seems like her priorities were totally different from the people she's supposed to be, serving.
Like she just wasn't thinking about how this trip would look to people struggling with overflowing trash cans.
Yeah, optics matter, especially in a leadership role. And it also makes you wonder if she wasn't even thinking about how this would impact county operations while she was gone.
That's a good point. Like, was there even a plan to make sure everything ran smoothly while she was away for 16 days?
That's the thing, 16 days, that's not like a quick trip over to China. It just gives this impression of being so detached from the, day-to-day realities of running a county government.
Yeah, and remember, Ed Slavin keeps pointing back to that Florida statute, 837.06.
Right, the one about lying to a public official.
Yeah, he's basically saying this trip could have some serious legal ramifications if she wasn't honest about why she went.
Yeah, I mean, even if it doesn't actually lead to any charges, the fact that people are even talking about it is really bad.
Totally. It just makes people question everything, you know? It's like, how can anyone trust her judgment if they think she might not even be telling the truth?
It's all about trust. And once that's gone, it's really hard to get back, especially when you throw in this whole email monitoring thing on top of it.
Oh, yeah, that definitely doesn't help.
No, it really makes it seem like she's putting her own interests ahead of the community's.
It's like what we see happening a lot these days, both in local and national politics. This growing disconnect between those in power and the people they represent.
Yeah, and it just leads to so much distrust and cynicism.
Exactly, and that's why being open and honest, being transparent is so important.
Absolutely. If Andrews had just been upfront about this trip from the beginning, if she had actually, talked to people about the garbage situation and what she was planning to do about it, maybe this whole thing wouldn't have blown up like this.
So it's a classic case of how not being transparent can make a small problem into a huge problem.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder about the example this sets for everyone else who works for the county,
Right, like if the county administrator isn't being held accountable for her actions, what does that say to everyone else?
It's like, why bother following the rules if the person at the top isn't even doing it? It can create this culture where no one cares about ethics or being accountable.
And who ends up suffering? The residents, of course.
Of course, they're the ones who elected these officials,
Yeah.
who pay taxes to fund the county government. They have the right to demand better.
Absolutely. They have the right to hold their elected officials accountable. So what can they do? They must feel pretty powerless right now.
Well, they can actually do a lot. They can go to county commission meetings. They can speak up during those public comment periods. They can write letters to the editor. They can even contact their commissioners directly.
So they have options. They just have to use them.
Exactly. And if they feel like no one's listening, they can even organize protests or demonstrations.
It sounds like it's time for the people of St. Johns County to make their voices heard. But what about Joy Andrews herself? Is there anything she can do at this point to fix her reputation and rebuild trust?
It's going to be tough, that's for sure. But she can start by being honest about what happened with the China trip and address those concerns about the email monitoring. And she needs to take real, concrete steps to show that she's actually committed to being transparent and accountable.
So basically, she has a lot of work to do. Actions speak louder than words.
Definitely. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the bigger picture here. What can other communities learn from this whole mess?
Yeah, good point. I mean, what can we all do to prevent stuff like this from happening where we live?
Well, I think it really highlights how important it is for governments to be open and honest with their citizens. When things are done in secret, it just breeds distrust and suspicion.
So it's about building a culture of transparency from the ground up.
Exactly. And that goes for both the government and the people. We need to create an environment where it's okay to ask tough questions and where those in power are actually willing to listen.
All right, so we've spent this whole episode talking about all these, well, kind of unsettling things about Joy Andrews, the county administrator in St. Johns County.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a mess down there. Between that whole China trip fiasco happening at the worst possible time and those concerns about them, maybe spying on people's emails, it's not a good look.
It really makes you question her judgment and whether she's even capable of leading the county effectively. So the big question now was what happens next?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's really a make-or-break moment for both Andrews and, honestly, for the residents of St. Johns County.
So what needs to happen? What are the next steps here?
Well, if Andrews wants to try and salvage her reputation, and let's be honest, that's a big if at this point, she needs to take some serious action and fast.
Like what specifically?
For starters, she has to address this whole China trip thing head on, and I mean really address it, not just give some vague statement or try to sweep it under the rug.
So she needs to be transparent about it.
Exactly. She needs to explain to people, was it really absolutely necessary for her to be out of the country for 16 days during such a critical time for the county? And if it was, then what did she do to make sure things ran smoothly while she was gone? And maybe even more importantly, why didn't she just tell people all of this in the first place?
It seems like a lot of this could have been avoided if she had just been upfront with everyone from the beginning.
Right. Communication is key, especially when you're in a leadership position. And that goes for this email monitoring thing, too. She needs to answer Ed Slavin's questions clearly and directly. What's the county's policy on all of this? Who has access to these emails? And what are they doing to make sure this isn't being abused?
So it sounds like a total overhaul of their communication practices in order.
Pretty much, yeah. But is that going to be enough to actually win back the public's trust after all this? I don't know.
It's a good question. I mean, transparency is a good start, but it's only part of the equation, right?
Exactly. She also needs to be accountable. She needs to acknowledge that mistakes were made, both in terms of her actions and, the lack of communication around them.
So take responsibility and then lay out a clear plan for how she's going to fix things.
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words, as they say. But what about the residents of St. Johns County? What can they do?
Yeah, it feels like they're kind of stuck in this situation. Like, what power do they really have to change things?
Well, they actually have more power than they might realize. This is where that whole idea of active citizenship comes in. They need to hold their elected officials accountable.
So how do they do that?
There are lots of ways. They can go to those county commission meetings. They can speak up during the public comment periods. They can write letters to the editor, contact their commissioners directly, you name it.
So they have options. They just have to use them.
Exactly. And if they feel like no one's listening, they can organize protests, start petitions, really make some noise, and let their leaders know they're not happy.
It sounds like they need to get organized and make their voices heard. But beyond this particular case, what are some of the bigger takeaways here? What can we all learn from this whole situation, even if we don't live in St. Johns County?
Well, I think it really highlights the importance of staying informed and engaged no matter where you live. We can't just assume that our elected officials are always going to do what's best for us.
So we need to keep an eye on them.
Exactly. We need to ask questions, demand transparency, and hold them accountable when they mess up. Because at the end of the day, our communities are only as strong as our willingness to participate and make our voices heard.
So it's a good reminder that democracy takes work. We all have a role to play.
Absolutely. We can't just sit back and expect things to magically fix themselves. We have to be active participants in shaping the kind of communities we want to live in.
Well, folks, there you have it. That's our deep dive into the ongoing controversy in St. Johns County, Florida. It's been a wild ride, that's for sure. But remember, every challenge is also an opportunity for growth and change. So stay curious, Keep asking those tough questions and never be afraid to speak truth to power. Until next time, happy diving.